Hi guys, happy Tuesday and welcome back to more of our Read Aloud Chasing Vermeer, written by Blue Balliett and illustrated by Brett Helquist. Today we are going to have part 11 of our Read Aloud, so if you missed any parts before this, go ahead and click down to my YouTube channel and into the playlist titled Chasing Vermeer to catch up before you listen along. Today we are going to be starting chapter 16, which is called A Morning in the Dark. The university school was built around a central courtyard. Gracie Hall, now the lower school, had been built in 1903 as a home for John Dewey's radical new school. Forming the west side of the quadrangle, King Hall had been built almost 30 years later for the University of Chicago's education department. The idea was to be able to observe what was going on in Dewey's now famous laboratory. A new middle school building, built in 1990, was on the east side, and the high school, built in 1960, on the north. Poppyfield Hall, tucked behind the high school, dated back to 1904 and had music and art rooms. The following morning, Calder and Petra sat down on a bench in the Grace Hall lobby. They were facing a stone fireplace that had a bust of Francis Parker on the mantel. Parker, a colleague of John Dewey's, had a university-high baseball cap on and a red scarf around his neck. The painting is small, remember? The canvas is only about a foot by a foot and a half. Calder was fiddling with his pentominoes. Think. Hundreds of kids and grown-ups go in and out of this building all day. There are cleaning people in here at night. What's a place that no one would disturb? Calder pulled a pentomino out of his pocket and looked at it. They both stared at the T in Calder's palm. T for 12. There aren't 12 floors. I don't get it. Calder shrugged. Petra sat up straight, her knees cupped in her hands. Let's try to think like Miss Hussey. She'd find a place with no leaks or mice or anything. Calder was scraping the tea back and forth on the wooden bench. 12. Does Miss Hussey have 12 of anything? She wears all those earrings. There's a key, a pearl, a high-heeled shoe. Calder was muttering now. Key, pearl, shoe. Shoe, pearl, key. Pearl, shoe, key. Heel, key, pearl. Key, pearl, heel. Hey! That sounds like keep her here, doesn't it? Petra laughed. Now you've got me thinking like a pentomino. Maybe this means she's in Gracie Hall. Calder, in his excitement, gave Petra a quick bear hug. Good thinking, he said. Straightening her glasses, she tried not to look too pleased. He and Petra agreed that they should pretend to make a master map of the school. This would give them an excuse to poke around during lunch. None of the classes, aside from their own, would know that it wasn't an assignment. At lunchtime, armed with measuring tapes, clipboards, and pencils, they had covered the first floor, checking even unlikely places. They looked in storage closets, behind file cabinets, under the beds in the nurse's office, inside old paper towel dispensers in the bathroom, around the coat rack in the director's boardroom, and beneath hats and mittens in the lost and found. On day 2, they covered the second floor, although it was hard to be thorough. Most of the classrooms had 100-year-old built-in cupboards and drawers and bookshelves, and it was awkward explaining why they had to look into those to measure the room. Petra got bitten by a hamster, and in the science room, Calder accidentally allowed a box of hissing cockroaches to escape down a heating grate. Petra dropped a hunk of limestone being examined by 4th-grade geologists on her toe, and Calder got a 3rd-grade teacher angry by trying to look behind her bulletin board and knocking off some drawings of the Great Chicago Fire. They had worked their way through Gracie Hall except for the basement, which was locked. They decided to talk with Mrs. Treck, the lower school principal, about letting them in. Always enthusiastic about kids' projects, she could be counted on to help. They explained about the map, and she agreed to take them down there the next day. That defeats the whole purpose. Calder was digging in his locker for his math book. He didn't realize that Petra had walked ahead. A voice behind him said, "Talking to yourself? Where's your girlfriend?" It was Denise. Calder felt his face get hot and slammed his locker door. Someone ought to hide her somewhere. Permanently. On Monday morning, they met up with Mrs. Treck, as planned. Reminiscing about the kindergarten field trip to the basement, a tradition in the lower school, Calder and Petra watched as the principal struggled with the bolt. They had forgotten how weird the place was. The walls were fieldstone, and the floor went uphill and down. Right angles had clearly been abandoned below ground level. They saw piles of rolled rugs, broken benches, a tangle of plumbing pipes, even a clawfoot bathtub. There were spidery shapes made out of old desks stacked top to top. Mrs. Trek had just unlocked the supply room when her cell phone began to ring. A parent needed to speak with her in the office. "Oh dear, will you be okay down here for just a minute? I'll be right back." As soon as she left, Calder and Petra opened the supply room door. Reaching bravely into blackness, Calder groped around for the light. It wasn't on the wall by the door. He took a couple of steps into the room, ran into a string hanging from the ceiling, and pulled it. Shelves of construction paper and boxes of pencils and rulers jumped into focus. Teachers were allowed down here for supplies. Both kids could imagine Miss Hussey using it as a hiding place. There was no time for talking. Quickly, they ran their hands along the shelves, looked behind curtains, tried to lift crates. On one side of the room were several old picture frames. Behind them, leaning against the wall, was a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. It wasn't as dusty as the others, and was the right size, no doubt about it. They heard steps coming down the stairs and Mrs. Trek calling their names. By the time the principal reached the supply room, Petra was alone. Petra told Mrs. Trek that Calder had needed the bathroom and had gone back up. As they walked toward the stairs, Petra asked if they could return in the middle of the morning. "I'm afraid I won't be free again until tomorrow." The principal smiled kindly as she locked the heavy metal door. "Think you can wait?" "Sure," Petra said, her mind racing. "No problem." As soon as she got to the classroom, Petra told Miss Hussey that Calder had a morning dentist appointment and slipped into her seat. She tried, but it was just about impossible to pay attention in class. She excused herself to go to the bathroom more than once, tore down to the basement door each time, and knocked softly. There was no sound from inside. Calder stayed crouched for what felt like hours. This was the darkest dark he had ever been in. The basement didn't seem to have any windows. At one point, he heard a scurrying sound. He knew that Gracie Hall, like most old buildings in Hyde Park, had mice. There were also those hissing cockroaches that had disappeared down a vent. He stood up. Holding the painting carefully, he took 2 steps, then 2 more. What if there was some monster living in this basement? Someone who had snuck in when the janitor wasn't looking. Humming tunelessly, he felt his way up the stairs. When he got to the landing, he tried the door to the first floor. The handle turned, but the door was bolted. He crept back down, trying not to touch the walls. Better to stay out of sight. Maybe, if he was lucky, someone would come down to get pencils and leave the door open long enough for him to slip out. He reminded himself that he was probably holding one of the greatest treasures of the art world. What were a few hours of his life next to all the adventures the lady must have been through in her 300-some years? Besides, now he and Petra would be famous. They'd be interviewed on TV. They'd be in the Chicago Tribune. Groping his way along, he found a chair and sat down slowly. He had better stop daydreaming. A number of things had to happen before the painting was safe. If it was the painting. To occupy himself, he worked on some puzzles in his head. First, he made 3 different 12-piecers. Then he tried writing to Tommy, but without the code it was tough. Soon Calder felt himself wanting to doze. It was so quiet and so dark. Petra hurried down to the lower school office at lunchtime. "Mrs. Trek isn't here, dear. She's gone for the rest of the day." The secretary looked irritated. Petra felt a rush of determination. "The basement. My friend Calder and I need to finish an assignment by today. Is there someone who could let me in?" "We don't allow kids down there alone. You know that." "Mrs. Trek said it was fine for us to finish our research, though," Petra lied. "She said she'd make an exception. Please? Plus, we're 6th graders." The secretary looked at Petra and sighed. "All right, just let me get my lunch." While the secretary was gone, Petra looked carefully at the top of her desk. Maybe the keys were inside the drawer. If she found them, should she race down and let Calder out? If the secretary came with her, she would discover Calder had been there all morning. It would be better to get blamed for taking the keys. She stepped quickly over to the desk, jerked open the drawer, and found, sure enough, the fat ring of master keys. Stuffing them into her pants pocket, she headed towards the basement exit as fast as she could, without looking conspicuous. She waited outside the basement door, pretending to use the payphone until there was no one in either direction. Her hands were fumbly and damp. First one key. No. Then another. No. Someone was coming. Petra picked up the phone again, her heart pounding wildly. She felt sure the person walking by would hear it, but they didn't stop. The 3rd key turned easily. Pulling open the basement door, she clicked on the switch and slipped inside. "Calder! Calder!" she whispered at the foot of the stairs. There was no answer. It was too quiet. Couldn't he hear her? As her eyes adjusted to the dark, she made out a small figure slumped in a chair. The package was still held tightly in his arms. Her first thought was that he had died of fright. She hurried over and gave him a prod. He popped upright. "Geesh, Petra, I ought to get 10 pounds of blue ones for being down here all this time." "I'm glad you're all right, but hurry up, Calder. I had to steal the keys. Hurry!" They were up the stairs, peeking out the door, and in the front hall in seconds. They clicked the basement door shut behind them. Petra grabbed a jacket from the lost and found box in the lobby and covered the package with it, just as the secretary came around the corner carrying her lunch. "Well, hello, you two. I'll be right back to let you in. It won't take long, will it?" Silent, both shook their heads. As soon as she headed off towards the office, Petra looked at Calder in a panic. "Now what? What do we do about her keys?" "Leave them in the door to the basement. She'll think Mrs. Trek left them there." Petra and Calder were too nervous to talk on the walk home from school. They raced up Calder's front steps and straight to his room. Both struggled with the zipper on Calder's backpack. In the rush at school, he had pulled it closed on the fabric. "Stupid thing!" Calder grabbed scissors from his desk and cut open the backpack. They pulled off the tape wrapped around and around the brown paper. The edges of a dark wooden frame emerged, and then an old backing. They turned it over. Someone with an eager, pear-shaped head and a green bun sat at a writing table. Her one visible ear was graced with what looked like a dangling ping-pong ball. There was an orange moon behind her and a melting castle. The painting might have been done by a second grader who was now a grandparent. It's not the lady they had been looking for. Chapter 17. What Happens Now? Calder was home with a cold the following day, and Petra walked home from school by herself. It was early December, and patches of ice alternated with drifts of brown leaves. Petra scuffed along, thinking about Charles Fort. He wouldn't be feeling discouraged. He'd have his eyes wide open. With that in mind, she picked up a scrap of graph paper off the ground and read, "Corn oil, butter, tea bags, onions, green grapes, bacon." She popped it into her pocket. Was there poetry here, in these accidental combinations of words? Would Fort have seen an interesting pattern or a secret of the universe in grocery lists? Hey, this might be something they could get into with Miss Hussey one day. Accidental combinations of sounds and ideas. Why did some words seem more elegant, more graceful than others? Why were some words peanut butter and jelly sounds, and others caviar? What made the words onion or tea bag so plain? Why did a word like ice or exquisite sound so lacy? Inspired by the idea, Petra spotted another piece of paper. It was tucked into a thorny hedge near Mrs. Sharp's house, and torn along the bottom. Folded in four, it looked worn. She opened it carefully and began to read. "Dear friend, I would like your help in identifying a crime that is now centuries old." Petra ran straight over to Calder's house. "Did anyone see you pick it up?" "I looked around, and only one person crossing the street." Calder blew his nose vigorously. "Do you think it's the same letter you started to read, the one that blew away?" "How could it be? Maybe there's a fourth letter?" Petra groaned. Calder reached for his pentominoes. "It's creepy to think of someone sticking that letter carefully in Mrs. Sharp's bushes." "Do we tell the police? It'll make it harder for us to keep looking." "Good thinking. But neither one of us should walk around here on our own. We can end up like that frog kid." They refolded the letter, placed it neatly inside a sandwich bag, and tucked it into the geographer's box. They each ate a blue one. Then they each ate two more. Calder was holding the P pentomino. "P for pray," he said, trying to grin. Petra looked horrified. "Pray?" she said. "Us? You mean we're being hunted?" "No, I meant pray as in hoping to stay safe," Calder said. "Maybe it's to pray that we're not prey," Petra added, scaring them both. The next day, more news broke. A book appeared in the stores that morning called The Vermeer Dilemma, What Happens Now. Easily a $50 art book, it was being sold for an unusually affordable $1.50. This was less than the price of a Big Mac. An anonymous gift had made it possible for everyone with an interest in Vermeer and in this painful situation to buy the book. Written by a respected art historian, it included an excellent color plate of every painting attributed to Vermeer. Thousands of copies changed hands across the United States on the first day, and countries around the world reported similar sales. The book was about all the positive things that had come out of this terrible crime. People were looking at and talking about paintings as they never had before. They were comparing furniture, tilework, the structure of a leaded glass window, the folds in a satin skirt. They were comparing details, like the way light struck a fingernail or a wrist bone, the look of a woven basket handle or a curl of hair. They were examining works of art with a toughness and intensity usually seen only in the buyers of new cars or electronics. Groups of people pointing and arguing energetically in front of a Vermeer had become a common sight. Museums were busier and livelier places. It was the first time that many untrained people had felt that they could say something of value about a work of art, something that might make a difference. It was the first time that many people had realized how murky and changeable the waters of history can be. When an artist leaves behind no personal papers, when hundreds of years go by, who is to say that followers or forgers didn't use his or her name to make some money? And, of course, the idea of correcting a centuries-old mistake, of pointing out that the experts in museums and universities weren't really as expert as they thought they were, was irresistible. Children were thinking about Vermeer too. They were comparing, writing, and visiting museums with friends. Many said they hadn't realized how cool old pictures could be. They also hadn't realized that the art in museums can be mysterious, that grown-ups don't always know what it means or where it came from. The author talked about how this uproar was probably also good for art historians and museum curators. It was forcing them to question views that had been accepted for decades, to look carefully at what they had been taught. Was the thief right? Was the public right? Why didn't the so-called early and late Vermeers have that luminous, haunting touch? The book ended by stating firmly that while what the thief had done to get the attention of the art world was wrong, the public's relationship to Vermeer and to other great masters had, as a result, changed drastically. People around the world had developed a comfort with great art that they had never had before. The theft was a gift. The last page carried a message to the thief. Whether or not museums chose to change the wall labels next to some of the Vermeer's paintings, the public had done an amazing job of spotlighting any possible fraud. Everyone was now looking. It was only a matter of time, the author suggested, before museums would respond to the public's thinking. In the meantime, a lady writing should be returned. The thief could consider his mission to have been successful. And that is where we're going to stop for today. Tomorrow we will start with chapter 18 that is called A Bad Fall. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back tomorrow for more. Bye!